Oh, there we go. All right, it's official now, folks. Recording is in progress. So FYI. How are we looking with participants? Oh, we're up to 23. I don't want to.
I was going to say, Melinda, I think let's like one more minute. Are you good with that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Let's if you'd like to go back to faces, we can welcome friends and colleagues.
Good morning.
I can tell you that a lot of us just came from the Vegas National Conference, and it was absolutely a tremendous success. It was so nice. If you're comfortable with hugging your friends, shaking their hand, rubbing elbows with them, it was so nice to see everybody after such a long time. The conference was great, and it was a great feeling, and I hope you get to experience that by coming to Burlington. So I believe we are waiting for a couple of more attendees. We've got a great summit for you today. I hope that you've all been enjoying the summits. It's another value-added benefit of your membership with the Northeast chapter. This particular summit is is an outreach of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We offer this up in the spirit and hopes that we learn, we grow, okay? We don't judge. And so Aapi, if you're okay, I'd like to-
You're good. Yep, you're good to go.
So welcome to the title of today's summit is Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, Triumphs and Challenges. I would like to acknowledge our sponsor today is DY Consultants. DY Consultants with proficiencies in planning, engineering, environmental, and construction and project management, also named a 2019 Best Company to Work for. DY Consultants, Dennis and his team, great friends and contributors to the chapter. So we thank you for your sponsorship, your generous sponsorship indeed, Dennis. Thank you. Aapi, I think I'm going to kick this off to you now.
Yep, thank you, Melinda.
Have a good summit.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's good to see new faces here. I love to see new faces, like I said last time, and I also like to see familiar faces rejoining us for our virtual summits. So this is the Northeast Chapter's third DE&I Summit this year. We've been doing back-to-back DE&I events, and we have another one coming up next month at our annual conference, like Melinda was talking about. If you have the opportunity, we would love to see you in Burlington, Vermont, for the chapter's first in-person event. It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. So today's summit is titled Asian American and Pacific Islanders, Triumphs and Challenges. Some of you might be wondering, well, it's July and that's not Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. You're absolutely correct, it's not. Something that we have discussed here in our DE&I summits is the need to continue recognizing and having dialogue about all things under the DE&I umbrella all year long, and not just during the 1 month it's recognized nationally, right? We hear about Black history from February 1st to February 28th. Then we hear about women's history from March 1st to March 31st, and so on and so forth. It's great that we intentionally celebrate the contributions of these Americans for a month, but we need to do it beyond just that 1 month. And we don't need to wait until that month to have a discussion about these important topics. So in that spirit, today in July, not May, we have an Asian American and Pacific Islander event with a very distinguished panel, and I'm really excited to hear from all of them. But before we get started, I just want to some housekeeping. We want to hear from you. These summits are really productive when we hear from you. This is, like Melinda said, a value added benefit to your membership, and for those that are new to our chapter, to hopefully one day for you all to join our chapter as well. So we want you to be able to chime in. So use the chat box and submit a comment or a question. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of this event, and we will get to your questions, and the panelists will have an opportunity to answer your questions. So moderating today's discussion is Dennis Yap, and I'm going to provide a brief bio of Dennis before I turn it over to him. So as president and owner of DY Consultants, and as a project executive, lead planner, and designer of hundreds of airport planning and engineering projects, Dennis utilizes his 37 years of airport experience towards ensuring the highest level of service. His engineering background has provided practical solutions towards addressing challenges that face airports, and his entire career has been focused on representing airport owners as their planner and or engineer in the development of their facilities. And I have to say, I've been fortunate to work with Dennis for many years now, so I could attest to that as well. So Dennis takes great pride and receives the most satisfaction in participating in the development of young professionals in the airport planning and design industry. He's made it a point to recognize motivated, energetic, and hardworking professionals, regardless of their background. His dedication towards this belief has resulted in leaders within the aeronautical community. So Dennis, thank you for being a part of the DE&I committee, for sponsoring today's event, and for moderating today's discussion.
It's my pleasure, Appy. It's a great initiative you've taken on. I'm just happy to participate in it. So thank you very much.
Go ahead, back to you, Dennis. You can start the discussion now.
So I guess we would like to do is today, first of all, I do want to thank you and Melinda and Paul for giving us this platform. It's typically when we have these discussions with AAAE, it's usually discussions that deal with technical issues, administrative issues, managerial issues. But rarely do we get an opportunity to talk about issues like what we're about to talk about today. So just want to say thank you for this and providing this platform for us. Today, generally, what I'd like to do is two parts is what I'd like to be able to talk about and have people take away, is to talk a little bit about the achievements and accomplishments that the Asian American Pacific Islander community contributes to the airport industry. But at the same time, I like to talk a little bit about the challenges. Not everything is exactly perfect. There are some challenges that we have to go through, and I thought it'd be sort of interesting to talk about that as part of it. I guess what we'll do today is that I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce the panel. I think it's important to talk a little bit about what they have contributed to aviation. I think it's important to have that discussion. It's just an example of what Asian Americans have contributed to the airport industry. And then I'd like to have a panel discussion with the group. It's actually a rather remarkable group. They've all have grown into managerial and leadership positions, and I'm excited to have an interaction with them. And then we'll have an opportunity to ask any questions from the panel. While I was at the AAAE last week, I got a lot of positive feedback from the group about this session, and I'm very excited to get input from the participants and answer any questions they like. And then we'll just close it out with a little takeaway or a little closing statement. So that's basically what we want to do. But I thought before we get started, I thought it'd be fun to go ahead and, Abby, you were kind enough to help us out with a little bit of a fun trivia question session for the group. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I thought it was interesting for me to see the questions you had, and I had some interesting thoughts about some of the answers as well.
Yeah. So we want to start the interactive portion a little early and just get warmed up for the conversation and see how savvy are you with some of AAPI trivia. So we're going to do a 5-question poll. So get your mouse ready, and we're going to start with the first question, and you'll have about 10 seconds to answer the question. Question number 1. According to the 2019 Census Bureau, the total Asian population in the United States is? %60 of the attendees voting. All right, I'm going to end the poll now, and I'll share the results. Megan, do you want to go to the next slide? So the answer is 7%, and actually most of you got it right. 50% of you got it right. As you can see, about 7% or 22 million Americans are Asian American, and California has the largest Asian population, and Wyoming has the lowest Asian population. All right.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I guess,
Sure.
you know, when I saw these stats, I thought it was sort of interesting. It looks, you know, based upon these stats over from the year 2000, 2019, the Asian American PI population in the United States has basically doubled, just to give you a little feeling. And it is projected at one time in the near future that the Asian American community will be the largest ethnic group in this country. And it's pretty incredible because it happened pretty quickly in the history of this country.
Okay. Everybody ready for the second question? All right, here we go. Question number 2. Which country is not located in the Asian continent? We got 30% voting, 50% voted. And I'm going to end the poll now. So interesting. All right. So it's a split. So the correct answer is all are in the Asian continent. So I know it's surprising. You may, by the way, your the pop-up window that has the poll results may be blocking the screen. So you could control that and move that back and forth. But the countries that are in the Middle East are also part of the Asian continent, and Egypt is also part of the Asian continent. It's actually split. Part of Egypt is in Asia and the rest is in Africa. So all of these countries that you see on the screen are part of the Asian continent, although that's generally, some of these countries are not typically included in the terminology AAPI or Asian American or things like that. Dennis, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, just the fact that, you know, there's approximately 50 countries that make up the Asian community. So it's not what a lot of people think. It's not traditionally Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Filipinos, Indians. It's a wide grouping of countries that make up the Asian community.
Great. All right, on to question number 3. According to the Pew Research Center, the largest origin group of Asian Americans is? We have, oh, that one, everyone's voting on that one really quickly. I have 65%, 67, 69, 72. People are getting warmed up here. Trivia, 72, and I'm going to end the poll here. Once again, we have a tie. Indian and Chinese. The answer is Chinese. According to the Pew Research Center, 23% of Chinese Americans make up the larger part of the Asian American group.
Which was surprising to me as well. I thought it was the Indian community as well. But I think an interesting point about this that I'd like to share is that this immigration of Chinese Indians to this country is rather new, especially there's been a bit of a history in this country about excluding immigration by Asian communities into this country. So a lot of the immigrants that come to this country are fairly new, first and second generation people. And that in itself is a bit of a challenge. I think I read one statistic I read somewhere where approximately 14% of the American community, American population was born outside the United States. But in the Asian American community, approximately 50% have been born outside of the United States in this country. So still a fairly new, a new dynamic with the Asian American group in this country.
Good point, Dennis. All right. Moving on to the next question. This was an interesting one. I didn't know of it, but question number 4. In 2019, a grassroots campaign was started to rename Oakland International Airport after this pioneering female aviator and member of the Women Air Force Service Pilots, WASPs, during the World War II. Wow. I think a lot more of you are knowledgeable in this than we were when we did the prep here. So I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. Most of you got it right. 68% said Margaret Gee.
It's interesting that a lot of the second one was Hazel Lee. So definitely people know their history. Either that or people have good access to the internet. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it has the campaign is still going on. It's the airport has not been renamed or anything like that, but it was interesting to read about this and the community around Oakland Airport and their campaign around renaming the airport. So it was quite interesting to learn about this. All right, and our last question. How many Asian Americans were Fortune 500 company CEOs between 2000 and 2020? %50 have voted, 60. I'll give it a few more seconds and I will end the poll. So most of you said 20% or 20. That is not the correct answer. The correct answer is 35. And I know, Dennis, you want to elaborate on this.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, and there was a little bit of a discussion of this glass ceiling for Asian Americans in corporate America, but the answer of 35, keep in mind, is 35 total from the year 2000 to 2020. I think there's another graphic, I could close the screen, but if you look at currently, how many Asian Americans are holding positions, corporate positions in those Fortune 500 companies, is only somewhere around 2 to 3%. And, you know, and actually the idea of women as well, you can see here that it's almost like a double glass ceiling, if you can imagine, for Asian American women. So this is something that is, you know, is worthwhile discussion on why that is. I believe I've seen that approximately 16% of the working population is Asian American, but in all companies in corporate positions, Asian Americans hold about 7%. So there is a bit of a disparity there that still, you know, that still is there, that it's worth being knowledgeable and aware of.
Yeah, and I think one other tidbit about this is the organization that took this poll was also wanting to clarify who they identified as Asian American, in that they were using East Asian Americans and South Asian Americans. As one of the questions pointed out, Asia is a continent filled with over 50 countries. So they didn't utilize that definition to do this. They used the definition that's traditionally known is East Asian and South Asian to classify the individuals for these CEO positions. So, and that's it. Thank you for doing this. I hope, I don't know how well you all did, but if you got all 5 questions right, good for you. If you, then you know now 5 different trivia questions, answers. So Dennis, take it away.
Yeah, you can share them with your friends as well. Yeah, I'd like to just get started by introducing the panel. It's a very impressive panel. They were handpicked specifically for this topic. They're diverse in many ways. Some of these individuals have immigrated to this country at young ages, at ages where their careers had already started or had been well underway. There's individuals in this group that had actually were even born in this country. So they all sort of have a different perspective and a different experience as being Asian American in this country. I think the one thing that they all do have in common is they all have solid technical backgrounds. And those solid technical backgrounds have been acknowledged, and actually had led them in and brought them into positions of management and even leadership. So it really is an incredible group, and I'm excited and appreciative of having them participate in this. The first person that I'd like to introduce is Alok Saxena. He's Director of Corporate Real Estate for the entire East Coast for United Airlines. He is a registered architect. He has over 20 years of experience. He's been involved and actually implemented some rather high profile and large scale projects, transportation related and commercial facilities. Some of the airports that he's been involved in have been JFK, Newark, LaGuardia, Teterboro, Boston, and Atlanta. I'd like to just give a brief minute to talk to us a little bit about what's keeping him busy these days and what's exciting at United.
Thanks, Dennis. So what's keeping us busy here is coming out of the COVID cycle that we experienced. So I know that everyone here can probably attest to the same. The whole point here is that we have compounded problems in transportation sector. We had a lot of projects before COVID that were sunset due to the pandemic, and we're trying to bring everyone back online and get air travel and transportation back to where it once was. So there are a number of, like I said, infrastructure projects we're working on, both back of house and customer facing. To your earlier points and more specific to this forum, I have a personal interest in the in what we're talking about here. I was once the vice president and then president of the Asian American Association at the Port Authority. So I was very involved with that, and still involved to some extent with other organizations outside of that construct. So just wanted to say thank you for inviting me here, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Luck. Thanks for joining us. Next on our panel is Liz Wang. Liz Wang is a manager for the Airport Planning Department at the Port Authority. She started her career in the engineering department as an intern, and she made her way up to a managerial position in APD. She's providing planning products that support the Port Authority's redevelopment capital programs. We've been working very closely with Liz. These programs are worth billions of dollars. I'm not even sure what $1 billion is, but that's very impressive. And she's doing all of this with the PA's vision of providing world-class facilities, which has been an initiative that's been going on for the last 5-6 years. Liz, can you brief us in a little bit on what you're working on these days?
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to say thank you to AAAE for providing me with this opportunity. I'm very honored to be here, to be part of this very important conversation. As Dennis briefly mentioned, my name is Liz Wang. I'm from Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. I'm a airport planning manager with the aviation planning division of the aviation department. And I think Dennis touched on very briefly, in my current role, I'm responsible for providing airport planning service to support the 3 major airport redevelopment programs at the Port Authority airports, JFK, LaGuardia. I'm sure most of you guys heard about it, and also Newark. We also provide technical guidance service to our 5 airports. In addition to LaGuardia, JFK, Newark, we also have Teterboro and Stewart. So we provide technical guidance to these airports in application of FAA design guideline. We have Dr. Lee from FAA, as well as the land use policy. We also coordinate with FAA's Eastern Region District Office. Again, I'm very honored to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Liz. Next on our panel is Lillian Tan. Lillian Tan is Vice President for Fraport, one of the largest airport operators in the world. Her experience is in real estate development, both in the public and the private sector. Some of the projects that I've been aware of, she was very much involved with the LaGuardia Airport Central Terminal Area Retail Development Program. She's also, prior to that, has been very involved with projects such as the Coca-Cola Company building in New York and the News Building. I know currently I've seen her work regarding the redevelopment of JFK, as far as the management of the concession programs for Terminal 5, which was where JetBlue is stationed out of. Lillian, I probably talked a little bit about what you are working on right now, but maybe you can fill us in a little bit more about that.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much, Dennis, and thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. It's been a real honor, and I learned a lot just from the trivia test earlier. As you had said, we had done this earlier, and I didn't know a lot about the Asian American community as it was. Right now I am Vice President in New York for Fraport, and leading a team to do the redevelopment of the concession program at T5. Happy to work with JetBlue. It's been great to work with an airline. Prior to that, I had a client that was the Port Authority over at LaGuardia. And so it's a very different client, and has a whole bunch of different challenges and goals than a public agency does. We're embarking on a $25 million redevelopment of the program and parts of the terminal interior in order to create a ground experience that is, reflective of the great in-flight experience that people experience in the air with JetBlue. And there are very loyal customers at JetBlue. So that's been very interesting for us to learn about the customer base and how to service them in a way that is slightly different than doing it for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. But that's pretty much what we're working on. Obviously, it was interrupted by the pandemic, but we hope to get back to that very quickly now. So thank you very much.
And I think it's very interesting that several of our panelists have worked both on the tenant side as well as the airport side. That goes for Alok and Lillian, and now next speaker, Mina Nieto, which we're excited to have on board. Mina Nieto is currently the Director of Planning and Development at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. I've known Mina for a long time. Her expertise is in an aviation land use planning and architecture. She does have a special interest in built environment, climate control, and sustainability. And she's written so many papers on this topic that she's been sought after as a speaker both internationally and domestically. So I'm really excited to have Mina on board with us today. Sort of an interesting fact that I had learned that she was accredited. She is accredited. She was actually the first Indian American woman that was accredited under this program. So congratulations for that. You're going to go down in history. And again, she's another person that I've known has worked both on the airport side and on the airline side. So it's a very impressive background. So Mina, maybe you could tell us what's happening in Atlanta these days.
Sure, Dennis. Well, thank you so much for that warm welcome, and good morning to everybody from here in Atlanta. So in my current role, I serve as the Director of Planning and Development for Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. And in this role, I'm leading a team of professionals from multiple trades for the strategic and tactical planning to serve our 114 million passengers annually, as well as provide planning and programming support for the 8 billion capital improvement program. I'm also in charge of conducting NEPA analysis, environmental compliance, grants administration of more than 100 million annually, and coordination of aircraft noise with the community for the busiest airport in the world. As part of my responsibilities, and of course, living here in this COVID world and visualizing what that new normal will be. So I also authored a document very recently for the recovery and resiliency from COVID. And this highlighted 3 areas of focus for us, which is essentially the touchless process and technology, the well-being of our customers, both internal and external, and then intelligent buildings, because I feel as an architect and a planner and an aviation management, expert, that the next area of our focus should be smart buildings, where buildings actually become a weapon in fighting biological pathogens for improving safety, security, and customer experience. So my goal is to provide solutions for future-proofing and empowering my team to provide a world-class service.
I'm sure you're going to be successful in doing that, and you're going to make that happen. And finally, and not last but not least, is Dr. Xiaogang Li. Dr. Li is a branch manager for the test and evaluation organization for the FAA at the Tech Center in Atlantic City. He is working, one of his initiatives is modernizing the national airspace system using the latest technologies. He had gotten his start with the group with a heavy concentration on pavement research and developing many of the standards that us engineers are following today as we develop airports. Since then, he's expanded into beyond airports and has worked his way into aviation as a whole, including being an important part of the Next Gen program. So Dr. Li, maybe you could share with us what's happening at the Tech Center these days and what you're working on.
Okay, good morning. First, thank you, Dennis, and for the invitation and the introduction. I'm honored to be here and have this opportunity to share some of my aviation experience. Before I start, I would like to read a simple disclaimer of my participation. The views expressed here, both explicit and implicit, are my own views and those of the FAA. With that put aside, two new technologies I'm working on will have significant impacts to the future of the airport operations. First, as widely reported in the news, the FAA now has the capability to track a space launch or re-entry in real time, in near real time, in the space vehicle travels through the night with a technology called Space Data Integrator. My test team conducted operational suitability testing for its deployment. It was first utilized during the SpaceX operation on June 30th. Why that is the interest of the airports? Think about the future, spaceports, dual use airports and spaceports. An example of that is the Virgin Galactic space vehicle operations on runways. The second one is the FAA Next Gen program we call the Terminal Flight Data Manager. It provides air traffic control tower controllers with the electronic means to share flight information in real time throughout the night. With a built-in algorithm, it optimizes the surface operations at the airports and shares the real-time air traffic data with the airlines and the airports to improve their operational efficiency. It is an exciting technology. The picture behind me is our TFDM test lab at the Tech Center. Because of time constraint, I cannot get into the details, but I want to leave you with a simple advice. As a current or future airport executive, you should expand your knowledge well beyond airports, since the smart technologies connect airports digitally with all their stakeholders. And I had a personal experience working in the various of the areas in that different technologies. Back to you, Dennis.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that took a little while to get through that, but I thought it was important because sometimes some of the contributions that the AAPI community doesn't always get recognized. And I thought it was important to just give an example of what's happening today in the AAPI community in aviation and how they're contributing. Sometimes it does go a little silent. Maybe it's not celebrated quite as much. And I thought it's worth having that little discussion. And this is just a small example of what's happening in the community. So my first question I'd like to pose, and by the way, I another little bit of a housekeeping thing, just to let everyone know, Lillian, being an executive, she has a commitment that she has to leave at 11, I guess in about a half an hour. So if she blanks off, I just want everyone to realize it's not a technical error, it's just a scheduling thing. The first question I'd like to pose to Dr. Lee, and I know Mina and Lillian would like to chime in on, what is your ethnic background, and how did your cultural values that were instilled in you by your family or your parents influence you in your career, both good or bad? Dr. Lee, you want to start that off?
Yes, good question. So my ethnic background is Chinese. I was born and grew up in Beijing, China. During the time, China was very much isolated from the rest of the world. My father was an electrical engineer. Naturally, that influenced me to pursue engineering. However, I realized early on that I really enjoyed hands-on building things, and which I could see, touch, feel. And that might have been why, instead of following my father's footsteps, I pursued mechanical engineering in China, which led me to Columbia University to pursue my graduate studies in the early 1980s. And years later, it helped me landed a research engineer job with the FAA at the airport payment research. Negative impact, I would say that because of the environment I grew up in, you were expected to listen, obey, and wait for a job to be assigned to you. Hence, it was not permitted to be independent thinker and questioning authorities, innovations, or motivations. It was impossible to set and achieve your own goals. That had significant negative impact on me, and it took a long time for me when I was in the United States to overcome it. And maybe we'll just share some of it in our subsequent discussions. Okay, Dennis, back to you.
Yeah. Mina, you'd like to add to that?
Sure, Dennis, and thank you. So as I say, my ethnic background, of course, my name is Meenakshi Nieto, so I'm 100% global. I'm Indian, of East Indian origin, the dots, not the feather kind. The cultural values instilled by my parents. You know, my dad was in the Indian Army. I am a military brat with discipline and a sense of curiosity. That is what my dad's job and my kind of like, bringing up brought to me. My dad is also a civil engineer by trade, and he actually built and led many hydroelectric dams across India and the adjoining country like Nepal, Bhutan, and Burma. So here me as a child, I grew up playing with toy trucks, excavators, and at a very small age, I was fascinated by the fact that in the construction of these huge dams, hydroelectric dams, the engineers created a fish ladder to save the fishes. One of my dad's projects is the only naval training center in India, and it's located in Chilka, Bhubaneswar. It's a western state in India. So this location is actually where the Siberian cranes fly all the way from Siberia, Russia, to Chilka, India, and take a journey of about 7,500 miles. So as a 5-year-old, I was totally fascinated by this. And I wanted to know how the cranes navigate and find their way. So this curiosity led to my diligence and commitment to the environment and sustainability, and taught me that the world is my oyster, just like the Siberian cranes. And it has definitely translated into my choice and career. As we all know, in aviation, we work day in, day out to connect the world and the people. So my upbringing definitely has had an immense influence on who I am and the career of my choice. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Mina. Lillian?
Sure. My ethnic background is Chinese. My parents came from China. I was born in the United States. They came during, well, my father came as a civil engineer during World War II, and my mother followed after World War II to come to complete her college education. Because after the war, the communism came in, and so they were not able to go back. And so that's how they ended up in the United States. And so we were born here and grew up here, and were raised as Americans, although with a lot of Chinese culture. A lot of the things that Dr. Lee has talked about, hard work, obeying your elders, respecting your elders, don't rock the boat. We're minorities in this country. Don't draw too much attention to yourself. One of the stereotypes of the Chinese and Asians in general, I think, is a high acumen for math and technology. And unfortunately, we didn't live up. My siblings and I did not live up to that stereotype. And so that was a surprise, not only to Caucasian Americans who would meet us, but also to my father, who was so proficient in math that he was shocked that his own children didn't live up to that particular standard. But my mother, on the other hand, came from a politician's family. And so she was very much into more social graces. And she always felt that we should speak up, make sure we're counted, not be afraid to speak what we believe in. And so that was a little bit of a conflict in the family and in my own kind of development as a professional and as a person. So it was very interesting for me. And I have learned that both sides of that have helped me in my career. And so I started off, in Port Authority in more of a kind of business project management role, and eventually morphed into real estate development. So that's my story.
Yeah, it is, I don't want to divert too far away, but yeah, some of the things that are installed in the Asian communities don't lead to people get moving into leadership positions. I had a conversation the other day with an individual that said that his parents were saying that you have such a great job, you're a government worker, you can have a job forever. And the response back was, well, that's not enough, I want more. So it's sort of interesting where we are and some of the limitations that we might place upon ourselves based upon our parenting. Second question I have is, how did you find yourself in this industry, and who were your mentors, and what impact did they have in your career? And second, to follow up on that, is what advice would you give young AAPIs in our industry starting out? I'd like to pose that question to both Liz and Alok.
Yeah, Liz, do you want to go first, or?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Thanks, Alok. I think in my case, I would think I transitioned to aviation naturally. I joined Port Authority right after college. My trade was civil engineering. I had a master in transportation planning. So I joined the Port Authority engineering department at the civil design group. I was a training class of 2004, a long time ago. Not long after I joined civil, I was given an opportunity to be a part of the design team that worked on a major runway construction for a runway at JFK. I think it was during that time I was able to go to JFK not as a passenger, but as a as an employee, as an engineer. I was visiting the construction site, checking out the progress. And I still remember I was able to walk along the almost 3 miles of runway back and forth for several times. So it was a very amazing experience. And I think that's where I wanted to be in aviation. I wanted to be more involved in airport project. So a few years later, I applied for a job in aviation department, and I got it. And so I guess the rest is history. I have to say that I do consider myself pretty fortunate for the career I have through Port Authority so far. We all have ups and downs in our career, but so far, I think I've been pretty fortunate to have met many amazing people, amazing dedicated professional within this agency. I mean, when I was with engineering, I've met many hardcore engineers, they're really hardcore. They told me so many things that I think that made me a competent engineer. And now with aviation, I have come across many people that are very, very smart people. They are on top of the games. What they told me, not on technical side, but what they told me is to look broadly, think beyond the horizon. I think what I learned from many of these smart people is you try not to put every observation, every experience into this pre-formulated mental cubicle, because as a human, we tend to do that. I think over the years within aviation, what I learned from these people is you need to think outside the box and be outside your comfort zone. So to me, I think these are what I consider as very precious, life lesson. Now, going back to the question, what advice you can give it to the younger generation, it makes me kind of feel old. But if I do say, if there's one advice I've learned over the years, I will say that regardless, what is your role, what is your job, you have to do your homework, you need to be prepared. It doesn't really matter if it's a presentation you are making to your leadership, it's a meeting you are having with your own team, or it's a collaboration you are having with other teams. You need to be prepared. You need to do your homework. I think as a Asian American Pacific Islanders, as particular as an Asian woman, you're gonna go into meeting situation. You are different. You look different. You talk different. I have accent. People say I have a very interesting accent. They can tell I'm from Queens. So even though English is not my native language, but somehow they told me I have a very interesting accent. But the point is, regardless of that kind of situation, right? If you do your homework, you are prepared, I think people will respect you because they know you are speaking from your knowledge. That will be my advice. I don't want to consider myself that old. So thank you, Dennis.
Actually, both of you represent the younger generation here. You and Alok. Alok, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you for saying that, Dennis. So I guess for me and Liz, that was a comprehensive look on what we're talking about here. Thanks for that. I guess I'll start with the perspective that my father and his friends have of me right now. So I've been deemed the job jumper, and it's something that I've explained to my family and to family friends, who are of Asian backgrounds, where when you're a doctor, the whole point is we have to be doctors, lawyers, we have to be something technical. And with those things in mind, those career paths have a track. You go to medical school, you go to residency, you keep moving, and as long as you're getting good scores on exams, you're going to keep moving. And with my path, I thought that I was going to, I was actually in an accelerated pre-med program in college, and I did everything I could to get into it. I even worked for, you know, a pharmaceutical company for a while in high school, and then in college the first year, and I realized this is just not for me. The people that are in this industry are not for me. What I'm doing is not for me. And so I was always interested in oil painting. And then my parents said, well, you're not going to make any money oil painting. Plus the oil paints are so expensive. How are you going to support yourself? So, you know, going into architecture, I became even more poor. So point being, you know, I needed to understand who I was and what I was trying to do. And, you know, I was interested always in the holistic approach to a project, a program, understanding that as an architect, I was helping with the backdrop for society and, you know, where people live and laugh and love and, you know, all that. So, you know, I finally came to a point where I'm happy in the position that I'm in. Now my dad, and this will sort of lead into what my opinion or advice would be to anyone, not just those of Asian descent, although based on my story that I'm about to tell you, a lot of us I think have experienced it. But my dad was in new drug discovery for Schering Plough Research Institute, and he got to the point where he had developed two drugs that are on the market now. One is called Noxafil, and it's a part of the AIDS cocktail. It's an antifungal. It also helps cancer patients, and he also contributed to the invention of Claritin. So just like you know, working for United or the Port Authority or anywhere else, you know, the company sort of owns the ideas. So don't worry, I'm not a trust fund baby or anything. But you know, that being said, you know, he had, you know, to develop these drugs, you know, you can't, you know, to Liz's point about thinking outside the box, he was designing, as architects do. He was designing glassware, and actually glassware that's used around the world in laboratories to this day. He has a chemical reaction named after him that you can go on Wikipedia and find. He received the Ronald Reagan President's Award in the late 80s. So he's someone who reached the pinnacle of research and science in his field. You know, so I speak very highly of him, you know, professionally. At the same time, he was someone who came home and would tell my mom that he was afraid he was going to get fired. He was always afraid of getting fired. That was always something. And, you know, I don't know if it was the lack of tolerance from his leadership or whatever it was when he'd speak out. And those of you on this meeting who know me, I'm a pretty outspoken person. But when I don't know something, I'll say it. So in my opinion, I didn't feel like he was someone who needed to feel afraid of getting fired. He was truly an asset to the company. And so, you know, the way that I've been living my life, I kind of professionally have lived by the seat of my pants, I guess, because I understand when it feels right to move on, I do so, because I'm always trying to enhance my life, make sure that I'm happy with not only the work that I'm doing, but the compensation as well. You know, it's something that I think from our background, and I can really only speak from my friends and family who are of Asian descent, who just feel uncomfortable in conversations saying in interviews, well, hey, how much am I getting paid for this? You know, I have 2 licenses, 3 master's degrees, and I've been working for 20 some odd years, and, you know, I'm just not happy with $80,000 a year. You know, that's just, and so, you know, it's instead of chasing after others to, you know, sort of recognize you, I think not being afraid to get fired really is the my sort of, it's not something I think about every day, obviously, but it's kind of my attitude towards my everyday. You know, I feel like there are poor days, there are good days, and there's excellent days. And if you can have 1 or 2 excellent days in a month, you're doing, you know, pretty all right. But but your everyday should be at least good, where you know that you're safe, people are looking out for you, you have the backing of your leadership as long as you're doing everything right. You know, there is this idea that, and I've experienced it before, unfortunately, but you know, oh, he's a pretty smart guy, just put him in the corner and like let him go, and then other people will take the work that was done and present it, and maybe not present it as well as the person who designed it or you know, tabulated all the data. So I think that's sort of my advice, you know, to just don't be afraid. You know, just because, and I see, Liz, your point about looking different or whatever, but who doesn't look different here? You know, you know, there's everyone looks like something. I know people who are not Asian who look Asian. You know, so it's an interesting thing, but that's what I got on that. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Luck. I mean, the culture or the feeling of just settling and holding on to your job is good enough for people that come from backgrounds that didn't have much. But then I'm happy to hear, you know, that kind of advice. And sometimes some of our, you know, there is a concern sometimes that sometimes our ideas are not as recognized or given credit, or sometimes silenced. And having this bold approach is definitely great advice for upcoming generations. Lillian, I know you have to leave soon. Can I ask you one more question before you go? Okay, you're on mute, but I'll ask this. This question is, as an Asian American woman, there's clearly a different dynamic and potential stereotypes that you may have faced either in childhood or in your career. Can you comment on this? And what advice would you give young AAPI women specifically based upon your experiences? So Lillian, I think you're on mute right now, just so you know.
Sorry about that. It's a really excellent question. And I have to say that throughout my career, and I've been working for over 30 years, and it's often difficult to distinguish for me between being treated differently because I'm a woman, or being treated differently because I'm Asian, or because of both. And I think that in my career, I have been stereotyped, not only in my career, but in my personal life, as initially being treated as somebody who should be kind of shy and retiring and being very amenable to kind of whatever is going on. And I think that is a stereotype that is often attributed to Asian women. There are some others as well, but I'm not going to go into those in this forum. But, you know, because of the way I was brought up and having kind of both sides of, you know, my father wanting us to be, you know, hardworking and obeying and all that kind of stuff with your elders. And then my mother being more of a social rebel, and always speaking out for herself, for her family, for her kids. I have learned that it is in my career, as long as you're talking. So one, listen more than you talk. And also, when you do talk, make sure you know what you're talking about and can actually back up what you're saying. And that has helped me a lot in getting through situations where, you know, I'm in a room full of men, and there are no other minorities, and being able to, you know, choose the time that I'm going to speak and making sure that I know what I'm talking about has been very helpful to me. There are times when I have been discriminated against, and I know it was because I was Chinese, and those are rare. But I was in an interview, and I was being, because I graduated Cornell, the gentleman who was interviewing me said, "Oh, my son just started at Cornell," and I said, "Oh, that's great," and I'm trying to, make conversation, and then he stops and he looks at me and he says in a very annoyed voice, he says, "And why are there so many Asians at that school?" And it was just, it really took me by surprise. I was young then. I was only in my 20s, and I really didn't have a good response to him. In today's world, I would have a lot to say to him, and I wouldn't care if I was going to get the job or not. And I actually didn't want to work for the man, so I didn't take the job. But it was an interesting lesson for me, and that was one of the times where I could really say it wasn't because I was a woman; it was because I'm Asian. I mean, those are the kinds of things that come to mind for me, and as a woman and as an Asian. And I just say to other young Asian women, or not other, I'm old. So to young Asian women, Asian Americans, or any woman really, is, know your stuff, do the homework, speak up at times when you feel you have something to offer, and just make sure that whatever you're saying, you can really back up. And I think that goes a long way. And also get to know people. That was something that my mother taught me, and it's to really try to reach out to people, get to know them, understand where they're coming from too. I mean, sometimes you may take something as, a slight or something like that, and it really isn't meant that way. So, be as open-minded and treat people the way you would want to be treated yourselves. So, but thank you so much for this. It's really been great. I've learned so much in talking to the other panelists. Wish I could stay longer, but it's a terrific forum. And, thanks to everybody for tuning in. And thank you, Deb.
Thanks very much for participating and providing your input.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
So long. Dr. Lee, you're a parent of two young women. Would you like to chime in on this a bit?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, I think. So I have 3 daughters, and 31, 28, almost 29 now, I think. And then I got a 24 years old. So I think the things really combined that bring them up are essentially the same what Liz and Alok said. It's to pursue what you're interested, what you love to do. And instead of the Chinese perceptions, you got to get in the STEM field, you got to either be an engineer or be a doctor, you got to be good in math, forget about the other things. So that's what I learned when I grew up. So not grow up when I started working in the United States, to overcome some of the negative impacts. So the philosophy bringing up my daughters are pursue their interests, what they like to do. I never constrain them. You have to go into the engineers or go to the math or be a doctor or be a lawyer. So with that, I think I'm somehow successful to the sense I got 3 daughters to pursue three different fields. My oldest one working for a think tank on international relations, especially with China, Taiwan, Japan, North, South Korea. So she had been working with the ex-US diplomats, ambassadors, and the State Department officials. So put a lot of influence, meeting with senior Chinese officials and ministers, and she participated in discussions and with the Taiwanese president. So yeah, she's somehow successful in her career. My middle daughter decided to follow my footsteps to become a civil engineer. So now she's a professor in one of the universities in New York City, and a successful career. My youngest one decided after working with children, so she decided to be a an occupational therapist. So she just got her license in both New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and pursuing her what she loves to do. So that's my advice, is really to pursue what you really love, and also at the same time, like everyone mentioned, stand up for yourself. Don't let other people take advantage of you because you look Asian, you're so quiet, and they won't take advantage of that. So all my daughters grew up that way. They would not allow anyone to take advantage of them. They speak out for themselves and they stand up for themselves. So that's my advice, yeah. My experience bring up younger professionals, I guess, right now, in this country.
Can I just add something to that really quickly?
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed hearing all of that, and I think that what's more is that to understand folks from different countries, not just Asia or the Asian subcontinent, but anywhere in this melting pot of a country, is to note that we, as I was born in New Jersey, and I've been accustomed to seeing strength as one thing growing up, and then there was the other thing from from my background. But for example, you have someone from an Asian country who is quiet or is reserved, but then speaks when necessary. And in these various cultures, that is a sign of strength. That is being bold. That is, so you don't necessarily have to be the loudest one in the room. There historically and traditionally has been a tribal mentality to families and villages where the elder would be the strongest one and speak when absolutely necessary, and when a decision needs to be made, and their experience would shine through during that time. So I just implore everyone to think about that when we're around a conference room table and somebody is quiet and then speaks very, very little, but it's an amalgam here, right? We have so many different kinds of people that see strength as different things, not just from European strength is seen as different as Asian strength or American or Canadian or South American or whatever it is. So it's just important to note these things. And I think that's where like unconscious bias comes in too, where you're sitting there and you're like, man, why doesn't that person say anything? I haven't said a word the whole meeting, but there's one thing, they'll drop that one tidbit in the meeting. It could have created a paradigm shift in the whole conversation, so I just think that's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head as I'm listening to this whole thing. I know in a lot of Asian communities, there's a feeling of deference to authority, and even the concept of looking someone straight in the eye in some cultures is actually considered rude, where in this country, that would be considered rude not to look someone straight in the eye, and it might be taken the wrong way. It is a challenge for the Asian community. Being silent shouldn't be perceived as being weak. We definitely have ideas. We hope they could get recognized, and I have a lot of optimism for the next generation that they will speak up. I think this is something that we've been sort of challenged with in this country. My next question is for Mina. One of the questions I had was approximately 2%, as we saw in the graphic earlier, of the Fortune 500 company executives are currently AAPI, which is rather small. In your opinion, is there a glass ceiling for the AAPI, and why do you believe that's the case?
So Dennis, that's a very excellent question. And actually, just like you showed in the trivia right in the beginning, it was truly mind-boggling, to see the numbers. So, as we've talked about, and we've used a couple of terminology like the model minority. So here, Asian Americans are often stereotyped as the model minority. And because of this perception, Asian Americans, they are left out of discussion of discrimination. And therefore, guess what? They are unable to break the glass ceiling. And this is leading to an inability in breaking the glass barrier. And sometimes this is referred to as the bamboo ceiling. So to be honest with you, I never thought about this. And as as a professional, I go about doing my job, but due to this forum, I had to figure out who I am and what are the impediments within our way. And that's where I came across this term of the bamboo ceiling. And I was like, oh yes, exactly. I've felt it at so many times. So here, if you see in the United States of America, while there is a high level of Asian American representation in professional roles, so we are approximately 13%, but out of that, only 6% are at executive, senior officers, and managers level. And furthermore, in the Fortune 500 companies, Asian Americans, they represent about a quarter of the workforce, but hold less than 2% of executive position. So my question is, what is missing? And with that question in mind, I came across an article published very recently in June 2021 by Margaret Chin. Margaret is a professor at Hunter College and Graduate Center College at City University, New York. And she indicated in order to move up to the C-suite, you have to gain trust. And I know a lot of my fellow panelists that talked about it, not looking people in the eye. So guess what? We are not looked upon as leaders, not being able to, chum it up at certain social platforms. So guess what? We are not looked upon as the people that can be trusted. So there is a value gap. And this problem is not about representation across roles, but the problem is about equity of promotions. Of course, being a planner, I had to look at more stats. So I looked at the national EEOC workforce data and found that Asian Americans, white collar professionals, are the least likely group to be promoted into management, less likely than any other races, including Blacks and Hispanics. So with that, I was thinking, what can be done to even the playing field out? And what I think the first that we can do is just increase awareness, talk about it, discuss it, and share the information, educate other folks. Secondly, we really need to figure this out. And we also, just like Alok mentioned, we need to define what is leadership and really how do we view our leaders. This will ensure we can clearly demarcate between cultural inclusion and management diversity, totally two different things. But at this point of our discussion, we are actually mixing the two, but we need to be able to demarcate between that, the cultural inclusion, and then the management diversity. And thirdly, companies and leadership, they need to change how performance and career conversations are structured to narrow this divide. So there is a lot that has to be done, not only at individual level, but also at the organization level.
Yeah, all great points, Mina. It makes me think about my career. I started it with a company that was a fairly large company, and I just did not see, I clearly saw that glass ceiling for myself, and I never really thought too much about it. I was born in this country. I didn't feel like I was truly disadvantaged, but then when I look back, I sort of realized that the opportunity really was never going to be there. And so like a lot of Asian Americans, I started my own business. And I think it's an unfortunate thing, but I think that's a typical story that happens in this country. And I think there does need to be some awareness to that. Thanks for that. The next question I'd like to ask Liz. The AAPI is probably one of the most, or one of the least understood ethnic groups in America. The example that Mina had just talked about, the model minority, is a bit of a misrepresentation. I guess the question to you is, what do you think is the biggest misperception that exists regarding Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in this country?
I personally, I didn't pay very close attention to this myth about model minority in the past. You're always aware there's discrimination, racist, bias because people's background, but I didn't pay attention to this myth. But I have been reading a lot of research publication for the past 2 years because everything that's going on in this country, in the world. And as a parent, as an Asian parent to Asian kids that are born in this country, I have had conversation with my children about this topic, the model minority, because it's out there. This stereotype is out there. I mean, this concept, this myth was introduced in the 60s, I think, very similar to what we are going through right now. I think the biggest misconception, in my opinion, is you hold this entire group of community, Asian American Pacific Islanders, as one group, as one uniformly high achieving community, that somehow this group of people have very successfully assimilated into this society. Therefore, there is no racial justice. There's no racial bias, that we have overcome the racial bias, and therefore you don't need support in anti-racist issues. I think that's a very big misconception, because if you really look at it, and from what Mina mentioned from the trivia question, you look deeper within that group, there are many subgroups. And maybe one group is doing very well, the other groups are not. We are, groups are struggling. And over the past 2 years, I read Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are actually the group of minority that are very less likely seeking support, for mental health, from anti-racist, compared to other minority group. But this stereotype, in my opinion, is very, very harmful, because the nature of any stereotype is you deny people the fact that we are different, right? You deny their historical characters, the fact that we all struggle, the fact that it's not the same. I think the danger with this myth, and I spoke with my kids personally, is when you think about the word model, and I found it very dangerous. You associate model with any group of people, you are implying other group are not model. I don't know why exist. I personally find it very, very scary, because then you're putting people against each other. And in my opinion, this stereotype is harmful, is also dangerous. There's a lot of work to be done, and I don't want to sound negative. We need to look at positive in the future, but as Mina mentioned, has to be conversation. This kind of forum, the peaceful protests, started from Atlanta after the shooting event. We have to make the voice heard, right? People need to educate among each other, listen, look at beyond that group, the character, but look us as an individual. I am confident. I'm positive that the younger generation, they will have a a better mindset than what we're trying to do, but there's a lot of work to be done in order to get rid of this myth, in my opinion.
Well,
Yeah,
it
those are great
quickly
points.
piggyback off Dennis, because really hit on something very, very important. You know, here as aviation managers, professionals, engineers and architects, let's build bridges. Let's not build walls, you know. I think we are very good at, you know, what we do technically in terms of like the aviation experts, but let's think about this and let's build bridges, not walls. Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, this model minority myth is a bit of a problem. It's like Liz had mentioned, it's actually through history, it's actually pitted other minority groups such as the African American community against Asian Americans, because this model myth story is sort of used to sort of discredit the claims of African Americans, and as a result, it puts Asian Americans in a little bit of a difficult situation at times. And the truth of it is that, you know, this model minority gives you the impression that Asian Americans don't need help. They do need help. There's, you know, the group that we have on this panel right now is exceptional, but there is a community of Asian Americans, first generations, that are struggling out there economically, and they do need the help. So this model minority is sometimes people would think of it as complementary, but it is a bit of a challenge for the Asian American community. And I think it's important for people to be aware of that.
Yeah, and it's also, Dennis, important to note that the model minority terminology wasn't actually coined by Asian people. So it's
true.
You know, and for that to be something that is a point of contention with other minority people of other minority designations is dangerous, and it's frustrating, but it also speaks to the work that needs to be done to really challenge this narrative that's been built into our society for generations. I mean, my parents came here in 1969 from England, from India to England, and then here, and you know, they dealt with so much. They dealt with so much in England during that time, because at the time the British, it had only been a few decades since maybe almost 20 years since the British actually left India, and so that mindset was still ingrained in society over there. I mean, happy to report one of the national snacks of the main snack of London is now chicken tikka masala, but you know, it's just important to note that, you know, we're sort of all in this together. We're not all okay. You know, I have family members who are down on their luck with the professional sector, and you know, they also need help. And just recently, the MBE designation, I know at United we're really driving home the need for you know, onboarding minority and women-owned businesses. I know the Port Authority is as well, and for a long time, you know, even I had a hard time. When I had my own business, I had a hard time applying for an MBE because I wasn't seen as a minority. Indian Americans were not seen as such, and that's changed since I had tried before and ended up not getting that designation 10 years ago. But you know, 10 years ago is not a long time ago. That just happened. So we have a lot of work to do still with that.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I just, you know, Appy, I see that we don't have a lot of questions. I do want to pass it back to you, but I do want to close with just thanking this really remarkable panel. You know, they provided great insight, and you know, they really are success stories in their own. And it's just been a pleasure for me to be involved and not only to conduct this panel in front of everybody, but the discussions we had are not discussions that we're used to having. So just wanted to thank each and every one of you, and look forward to continuing this conversation. Appy, I'll turn it back to you. Sorry about that.
Oh, no. Oh, thank you. Thank you all very much for having this important dialogue today. I actually had some questions in my head, but I think as through the organic discussion that you all had, some of those were answered. But I will actually just to make sure everybody has the opportunity. I didn't see any questions in chat box. Is anybody willing to unmute and ask a question? You don't have to, but I just want to give that opportunity if somebody does want to. Okay. No worries. I think we've certainly started the wheel turning for all of you, hopefully, with some of the discussions that's been happening here. So AAPI is a term that's used to describe, right, a very diverse and fast growing population in this country. It includes about 50 ethnic groups rooted in more than 40 different countries. I can say that where my national origin is from is not represented in this panel today. So it's important that we not stereotype, dismiss, or minimize the experiences of Asian Americans, Asians, AAPIs, whatever the terminology that people wish to use. Individuals do not share languages, individuals do not share heritage, religion, and there's just so much more that is not shared amongst the Asian American population. So again, it's just important that events like today, we have these conversations to shine the spotlight on some of those voices. Again, some of those voices, right? Key is that, like Dr. Lee said, his voice doesn't represent others. And so the individual voices that you heard today isn't necessarily representative of even other individuals in the same group. So, but it's important to hear these voices and take away whatever you think is beneficial for you. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, the last 90 minutes. And I hope you enjoyed this discussion and were able to take away something from our event today. So that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Melinda to close us out.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, DY Consultants. Thank you, Dennis Yap. Thank you to our speakers today. Thank you to AAPI for shepherding these important subjects to the members of the Northeast chapter. I'm Melinda Montgomery. I'm the Vice President of the Northeast chapter. Thank you for taking the time today. We appreciate the opportunity to open our hearts and our minds together. Final reminder, NEC Burlington, August 15th through the 17th. Hope to see you there. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.